Hi guys and welcome. In this video we're going to be taking a look at this little chronograph here, and this uses a Landeron 48 chronograph movement. We're going to open this up and take a look at the movement inside and see what's needed. Let's just take a look up close with the back removed and get something to point with. And initially it does all look very complicated, and this is because we've got all of the chronograph works, all this bit on the top, the chronograph bridge, the hammers here, and all the mechanism that makes the chronograph work sat up on the top. If I give that a little wiggle, you can see the balance wheel does indeed shake, so hopefully that's all is well there. I can see a problem there. I don't know how you can just see that there. We've got this spring, which is a jumper spring for the minute wheel. This is the minute counter wheel. You've got your sweep seconds, your large sweep seconds, your small seconds at 9, which is for the watch, and then your minute counter wheel, which counts up to 30 minutes here. That jumper spring there, as you can see, is the jumper spring for the minute wheel, and that is kinked up quite badly. I don't know if I'll be able to get a replacement one of those. I don't know if that will be usable as it is. That is the spring that allows your minute wheel to click round just 1 minute at a time and in that direction, like so. I suspect what's happened here is there's been some backlash at some point. This is pushed back and it's pushed this spring up, which has bent it, and it's very, very fine. Very, very fine. There's no way I'd be able to straighten that without it breaking, I'm sure. Yeah, I'd be wary of trying to make adjustments to that. So I'll have to look and see if I can find a replacement for one of those. This is the problem with the Landeron 48 is, although it's a well-known movement, parts have been unavailable for a long time. A lot of parts are unavailable for a long time, so at the moment everything else looks reasonably clean and reasonably in good order, so hopefully it's not too bad. Let's just check. The pushes are working well. This movement differs from your normal, well, from modern chronographs where you'd be used to seeing you press the start and then the start button also stops the chronograph, and then the reset. Bear in mind this is upside down, of course. On these, the stop and reset are the same button, so the top button is the start, and you can see there that moves the hammers away from the hearts and engages your drive wheel, which drives your centre seconds, and then after one full revolution of the centre seconds it then rotates and drives this wheel, which drives your minute wheel round one place, one point. To stop it, you press that like so. Everything's still engaged but the movement is stopped, so you can press start again to continue. But once it's stopped and you want to reset it, these are the hammers, and these are the points which engage the hearts, which reset these to 0. Press the reset and you can see they drop back in and reset the hearts, thereby resetting the hands to the 0 position. Next step is to remove the movement from the case, and here I'm removing the rear retaining ring, and just down here is a spring which is for the flyback lever. This is not actually the correct spring. This has been fitted in lieu of the correct spring at some point in the past. The correct one should actually be a wire type spring. So I will have to see if I can source a replacement. And then the whole movement pushes out of the front along with a front retaining ring and the chronograph pusher buttons. Once the movement is released, you can see here the construction of the case, and although the whole thing is 18 karat gold, the case back, the bezel and the case itself are very, very thin, and you can see it even has hollow lugs, so care has to be taken with the spring bars and the lugs. Gave the workings a quick cursory check over and refitted the balance cock and managed to get that beating, but you can see it's a very, very low amplitude. I mean, it's barely swinging there. I don't know how well that comes across on video, but that's barely swinging at all. It's barely making 90 degrees on there, and that's fully wound. So possibly a combination of the mainspring and gummed up train. We'll see when we get there. The next thing to do now is to start stripping the chronograph. For this I will need to get a hold of the document for the stripping procedure, because ordinarily I will quite happily wing it with any movement because they're all much of a muchness and it's a case of just logically working through in order. With the chronograph works, and with them being slightly different chronograph to chronograph and having not worked on a Landeron before, some of these screws are not actually securing screws. Some of them, such as this one for example in the middle of this minute recording jumper, is an eccentric screw which is designed for adjustment purposes. So there's a few of these dotted around, and I need to identify which ones of these are eccentrics, because I want to be certain that I don't move any of those during the disassembly process, because if you move any of those, adjustments then have to be made to make sure everything meshes and works correctly afterwards, and I want to minimise the necessity to do that unless I have to do it. So unless it's been messed about with before, provided everything's where it should be a case of removing the securing screws, removing the components in order, because obviously I don't want something to go pinging off to be lost, and hence the reason I need the schematics, so I know the order in which the chronograph works have to come apart. Once the chronograph works are off, the movement side of it will be very straightforward, just like any regular watch. And then once it's all been cleaned, once the parts have been inspected and then reassembled, we can kind of see where we can go from there. What I do know just now is that I can strip it, clean it, reassemble it as it stands, and it will work fine with the exception of the minute recording wheel. Getting to the click on this is a little awkward. You will need a very fine screwdriver or a fine tipped pair of tweezers or something similar, and the click is accessed through this little hole just here, and if you can see, as I turn the winding button there, you can just about see that sort of move up. And what you can do, I'll need to do this from this angle, so apologies that it's going to make it a little difficult for you to see where the screwdriver's going, but I'm sure you kind of get the idea. You need to fit the tip of the fine screwdriver in at an angle. If I can just tilt that towards me so I can see what I'm doing here, bear with me. There we go. Holding that click open, I can then allow that crown to slip through my fingers and take the power off the main spring. Now, reading the diagram and the document for the chronograph works, it's recommended to remove the balance cock and the pallet fork before disassembly or reassembly of the chronograph components. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I've already had the balance cock off to inspect the pivots and what have you. There's a little indent at the back of this which allows you to insert a screwdriver so that you can work this free very carefully so as not to ping that off and damage the delicate hairspring. And this is a relatively tight fit, so you do need to be careful. There we go. So once that's clear, I like to lift the balance wheel off like so, and then lift the whole assembly off in one piece like so. And then we place that this way up so that you're not resting all the weight on the one pivot. Removal of the pallet fork cock is the same principle. You just undo the single screw that holds it. And using a screwdriver again, levering very carefully so as not to damage the pivot on the pallet fork itself. Until you can feel that that is free. Well, it's better to take your time and make sure that that you do these things carefully, because pivots are very fragile. Although they're a hard metal, they are very fragile and can snap easily. And then we go ahead and remove the pallet fork cock and the pallet fork, which you can see just there with its very interesting clear pallet stones. Quite novel. There we go. And that's the train now exposed. Now you can see there, when I apply power via the mainspring, how it's spinning quite reluctantly. That should be spinning very rapidly. Next we move on to the dial side, and the hands are removed via the conventional method using a Presto hand lifter in this case, and a polybag to protect the dial from damage. The sub-seconds and the minute counter hands are loosened by wiggling the dial up and allowing that to pull the wheels off of the pivots. Here I'm showing the centre seconds, which has a curved tip, but the tip needs straightening out a little as it does actually contact the dial during movement. And here we can see the minute and sub-seconds hands removed. The dial feet screws are located through the rear of the plate, and they're recessed into there. They're a little bit hard to find and different to your conventional dial feet screws, which tend to be on the sides of the movement, so a little trickier to find. And obviously trying to remove the dial without loosening these, which are on eccentric cams, will cause damage to the dial. So it's important that these are correctly loosened, and then the dial is levered gently, working your way round. Apologies for obstructing the view of the movement there, but essentially what I'm doing there is just as before, working round with the screwdriver to lift the dial away. And there's the dial removed, and underneath that the dial side of the plate, you can see, is actually very plain, straightforward, and no complications there other than the extended pivots for the fourth wheel and for the minute counter. You'll see also that the setting lever spring plate has a broken spring, and this was nowhere to be found in the case, so this has been broken at some point in the past and lost or discarded, so that will need to be replaced, and the dial just goes into protective tissue wrapping there. So the next step is stripping of the chronograph works, and we will continue that in video 2. So thank you for watching so far, and we will see you in the next video.